Hi guys, how are you today? Tonight, we drift not merely through time, but through a life shaped by expectation, adorned in silks and symbolism, tucked within towering stone walls, yet often wrapped in silence. She is not merely a lady, but a princess, a daughter of kings, a symbol of peace, a promise, sometimes kept, sometimes broken. If you're as excited as we are to dive into this captivating journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more adventures into the past. Let's uncover the mysteries of the Middle Ages together. Hit that bell icon too, so you're always first in line for the next historical adventure. So settle in, fluff your pillow, maybe light a candle. Let's dim the lights and take a deep, relaxing breath. Education and skills. From her earliest days, she is surrounded not only by lace and lullabies, but by scrolls and tutors. She learns to sit straight, to curtsy just so, but also to read Latin, to write in French, to calculate sums in Roman numerals, and recite the histories of saints and kings long gone. Some days, she studies the stars. On others, she learns the intricacies of courtly diplomacy, how to speak without offence, and how to listen without revealing too much. In the afternoons, she takes to the lute or harp. Her fingers dance not for applause, but for elegance, for preparation. The pen before the crown. In a world where most peasants never learned to write their own names, a princess held a quill and traced her thoughts in ink. Her lessons began before the sun had risen, while frost still kissed the window panes, and the torches sputtered softly in their iron sconces. Her governess would sit at her side, not stern, but steady, guiding the curve of each letter as it looped across the parchment. Latin, first, the language of the church, of power, of eternity. She murmured psalms aloud. Each syllable is a stepping stone to heaven, or to influence. Then came French, her court tongue, elegant and fluid, and English, coarse, rustic, real. Some princesses in rare courts also learned Greek and spoke of stars, of Hippocrates, of distant philosophies tucked into fragile vellum. Mathematics followed, not to calculate markets, but to understand inheritance, dowries, and how to measure land by shadow and rod. Music, too, the pluck of the harp, the long, breathy tone of the recorder, the charm. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the learned lady. But among the many daughters of nobility, one stood apart like a candle in a cathedral. Eleanor of Aquitaine, born in 1122, heiress to the vast duchy of Aquitaine, she was not simply taught, she absorbed. Unlike most women of her day, Eleanor was raised in a court of poets and philosophers. Her grandfather, Duke William IX, was a troubadour and filled his halls with music, wit, and inquiry. She read Ovid, knew the songs of the Provençal bards by heart. She debated theology with priests, quoted Latin maxims with ease, and sponsored literature, not as a patron, but as a connoisseur. When she became Queen of France, then later Queen of England, she didn't simply attend court, she shaped it. She was the mother of kings, including Richard the Lionheart, but she was no mere cradle for power. She advised, negotiated, and even led armies during the Second Crusade. Eleanor was a living argument against the notion that a woman's mind was a quiet, delicate thing. The classroom within the castle. For our princess, her lessons were often lonely. She sat beneath a stained glass window, its blue light pooling at her feet, her books hand-copied by monks in a nearby abbey. Ink smudged her fingers. a small, secret badge of her ambition. Her tutor might bring a globe and turn it slowly, speaking of Constantinople, Jerusalem, the lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules. She asked questions. Some were allowed, some were not. She learned, too, the unspoken language of survival, how to remain silent in a council of men, how to offer advice without seeming to advise, how to know and pretend not to, learning beyond books. Every corridor held a lesson. She watched the steward balance accounts, 1,000 eggs for the spring feast, 200 candles for the chapel. She listened as her mother arranged a marriage, weighing bloodlines like currencies. She observed the priest anoint a sick servant, and wondered what words carried a soul to peace. These were her lessons too, and in time she would teach them to her own daughters, in whispers, in glances, in the slow unfolding of a letter sealed with wax. Routine and responsibilities. A princess's day begins in stillness, a whispered prayer, a soft clink of the basin as water is poured for washing. She is dressed, not hastily, but as one would adorn a statue in a chapel. Every pleat, every ribbon, every jewel means something. Then she walks, with a slow purpose, through the great hall, perhaps to greet an ambassador, or oversee the steward's account of the kitchens. Sometimes she is asked to smile, sometimes simply to sit and be watched. The architecture of her day. The day of a medieval princess was not her own. It was a structure, quote, an invisible cathedral built of expectations, quote, of bells, quote, of glances and gestures. She did not wake when she pleased. She woke when she was expected to be seen. And from the moment her eyes opened, her performance began. Quote, second-lined, the first light. A servant enters before the dawn, quote, carrying a brass lamp that pools warm light across the flagstone floor. She pulls back the bed curtains, quote, heavy velvet, embroidered with her family crest. The air is cold, her breath clouds faintly, quote, but she does not flinch. A bowl of warm water is placed on a small chest. The princess washes her hands, her face, her neck, quote, each motion deliberate, quote, quote, each touch a quiet act of composure. Her linen chemise is lifted over her head, quote, deliberate. Then her stays, her kirtle, her gown, quote, layers upon layers until she wears not simply cloth, quote, deliberate, but status. Colt, jewellery is chosen with care. Quote, a girdle with pearls. Quote, a brooch with a small sapphire. Quote, not ostentatious. Quote, not yet. Her hair is braided and coiled. Quote, perhaps hidden beneath a veil. Quote, or fashioned into horns. Quote, depending on the fashion of the year. Quote, a crucifix rests against her collarbone. Quote, she kisses it before leaving the chamber. Quote, hours of prayer. Quote, and laws are priced down. She walks to the chapel. Quote, limbing cool, stone beneath soft leather slippers. Quote, light from stained glass dapples her path in hues of ruby and emerald. Quote, matins. Quote, prime. Quote, terse. Quote, she kneels with the chaplain. Quote, fingers woven in silent reverence. Quote, the psalms are murmured. Quote, not sung. Quote, this is not for spectacle. Quote, but for grounding. Quote, a noble woman's soul must be as ordered as her garments. Quote, and so she begins each day. Quote, with surrender. Quote, first light. Quote, The steward's report. After prayer, she moves to the solar. Quote, a warm, sunlit room where women gather. Quote, and where the business of the household quietly unfolds. Quote, the steward enters. Quote, he bows. Quote, she nods. Quote, he reads. Quote, the amount of flour consumed. Quote, the work of the hands. Back in the solar, she joins her ladies. They stitch, not only to pass the time, but to fill it with purpose. A wall hanging is taking shape, Saint Margaret slaying the dragon. Each thread is an act of devotion, each mistake an opportunity for humility. They speak softly as they work, of weddings, of the weather, of the new bishop's homily, and whether he meant what he said, correspondence and courtly affairs. Later, she dictates letters to her father, to her sister cloistered in a northern convent, to her husband at war. She chooses every word with care. A single phrase might alter an alliance, or heal an offence. Seals are heated, wax is dripped, crests are pressed with practised certainty. Then she attends a council. She does not speak first. She may not speak at all. But she listens to the barons, the advisers, the abbots. She reads their faces like illuminated manuscripts, and sometimes a word from her can change the direction of a decree, entertainment and guests. In the afternoon, a bard may perform, or a noble visitor arrives with news from another realm. She receives them with poise, offers wine, asks questions, but never too many, laughs, but never too loudly. Her presence is not ornamental. It is a message, a symbol of her household's dignity and grace. Children may be brought in, tutors report on their progress. She praises them gently, not with indulgence, but with a kind firmness. She is shaping more than minds. She is shaping futures, evening routines. As the sun sinks, her pace slows. She returns to her chamber. The fire has been lit. Her shoes are removed. A maid brushes her hair. 40, 50, 60 strokes. She breathes in lavender from a nearby sachet. She changes into her nightgown, soft linen with embroidered cuffs. She prays again, this time more softly, more privately. She remembers those lost. She prays for peace. She thanks God for the quiet. And then, beneath woolen blankets, beneath carved beams, beneath a canopy painted with stars, she sleeps, not as a princess, but simply as a soul. Leisure and entertainment, but even duty yields to moments of delight. She plays chess with a visiting countess, losing with grace, winning with even greater care. A falcon rests on her gloved hand, its eyes sharper than any courtier's. She rides beneath a canopy of trees, accompanied by ladies in waiting, the hooves muffled in the forest loam. In the evenings, she listens to tales of King Arthur, or old Norse myths, sipped like warm honey beneath candlelight. Political and social role. The silent hand on the scepter. A princess is born into diplomacy. Long before she speaks, her name is spoken in foreign courts. Long before she walks, her dowry is weighed in gold and land. She is a daughter, yes, but also a bridge, a symbol, a promise. Her life is not her own. It belongs to kingdoms. Marriage alliances, promises in ink and gold. She is betrothed before she bleeds. Men speak of treaties, of peace, of borders and banners. But for her, it is a journey. From home to somewhere else. Across hills, across water, to a place where her tongue is strange, and her smile must never falter. She wears a dress, not of her choosing. She kneels before in-laws she's never met, and she learns the shape of her new life, with the same precision she once applied to her letters. She is watched, studied, measured by her bearing, her fertility, her usefulness, and still, she endures. Historical echo. Margaret of Scotland. Take, for example, Margaret of Scotland. Born a princess of Hungary, raised in exile, she married Malcolm III, King of Scots, in the 11th century. She brought not just beauty, but refinement. She introduced Latin liturgy to a Gaelic court. She rebuilt monasteries. She fed orphans with her own hands. Her piety became legend. Her reforms, lasting. And though she never wore armour, her presence reshaped a kingdom. She was canonized a saint, but she was also a strategist. Influence and power. Behind the throne, beside the throne. Not every princess fades into the backdrop of banners. Some step forward, quietly, deliberately. They advise their husbands. They host ambassadors. They mediate disputes between nobles. They write letters to the Pope. Their power is often soft, but unyielding. When their lords ride to war, it is they who hold the castle. When the coffers run low, it is they who manage the estate. When there is illness, they command the almoners and apothecaries. They speak, and the servants move. The scribes record, the court listens. Historical echo, Blanche of Castile. Look to Blanche of Castile, Queen of France, regent for her son, Louis IX. When her husband died, the crown was placed upon a child, and so Blanche ruled in his stead. She fought rebellious barons. She negotiated with England. She ensured the church's favour, and when her son finally came of age, he ruled as St. Louis. Historical echo, Empress Matilda. And then there is Empress Matilda, daughter of Henry I, heir to the English crown. Denied the throne by men who could not accept a woman's rule. She fought, not with sword alone, but with patience, strategy, endurance. She never wore a crown, but her son, Henry II, would, and through him, the Plantagenet dynasty was born. Her failure was only temporary, her legacy, eternal. The politics of silence. Not all influence is visible. A well-placed word in a corridor, a raised eyebrow at court, a gift sent to a bishop's niece. She knows the power of subtlety, of patience. Men fight wars, women plant seeds, and in time, it is the quietest acts that shape the loudest histories. The language of silk and scent. A medieval princess did not speak only with her lips. She spoke with the sway of her sleeves, with the colour of her veil, with the way light danced on her embroidered hem. Her garments were not simply for warmth, nor solely for beauty. They were declarations, stitched symbols of her birth, her realm, her virtue. Every layer, every clasp, every jewel told a story. Fashion and attire, the art of being seen. Before the day began, long before she entered the great hall or the chapel, she was transformed. Her maids presented choices. A gown of deep wine-red velvet, stitched with tiny acanthus leaves in gold thread. Or perhaps a softer surcoat, sky blue, lined in grey squirrel fur, elegant for winter's morning frost. The chemise came first. Linen, simple, soft against the skin. Then the kirtle, shaped to her frame with lacing along the ribs. Then the overgown, open at the sides or full-sleeved. Depending on the occasion, the guest list, the rumours at court. Jewellery was chosen with care, not too much, but never too little. A girdle of seed pearls, a pendant with a relic encased in glass, a ring with a stone said to ward off poison. Even her veil, its length, its transparency, its edging, was a subtle gesture of status and modesty. To dress was not vanity. It was a form of diplomacy, an armour made of silk. Isabella of France, the she-wolf in silk. One of the most striking noblewomen of the 14th century, Isabella of France was renowned not just for her beauty, but for her fashion, presence, and precision. As the daughter of King Philip IV of France, and later Queen of England she understood that a noblewoman's fashion was never frivolous. It was strategy, softened by elegance. Fragrance and scent, an invisible aura. Though baths were rare in the cold stone of a castle, hygiene was never forgotten. The princess rinsed her hands and face in rose water. She dabbed her wrists with oil of lavender or sweet balm. A sachet of crushed herbs was tucked into her bodice, releasing a gentle perfume with every step. Her hair was often perfumed, sometimes with milk of violets, or rinsed in rosemary boiled in wine. And though the air in great halls was thick with smoke and spice, she left behind a trail of softness. A noblewoman's scent was not overpowering. It was memory, whispered. Food and feasts, dining as display. To dine was not only to eat, it was to be seen eating, with poise. She was served on pewter or silver. Her bread was white, her meat carved before her eyes, her cup always full, but never emptied too quickly. She touched food lightly, tasted, never gorged, fed the lapdog at her feet when no one was watching. Courses might include almond stew, spiced lamprey, candied fruit set upon wafers. After the meal, a goblet of hippocras, wine with sugar and cinnamon, and a sweet called comfit. She dined not for hunger, but to model grace. Agnes Sorel, the king's jewel. Agnes Sorel, mistress to Charles VII of France in the 15th century, was perhaps the most influential fashion icon of her era. Though not a princess by birth, she was treated as royalty in every visible way. She popularized low-cut gowns, revealing necklines not as scandal, but as bold confidence. Her garments shimmered with silver and pearls. Her hair was powdered, coiled, and braided with ribbon. Paintings of Agnes show her serene, dignified, not lewd, but luminous. She wore beauty like a birthright, and in doing so, she changed what noblewomen dared to wear. Living quarters, the private kingdom. Her rooms were her refuge. Walls draped with tapestries, scenes of forests, saints, or lovers, to keep out the cold and echo. A canopy bed stood at the centre, its silken curtains drawn not only for warmth, but for ceremony. On her table, a book of hours, a polished comb, a mirror of polished brass or obsidian. There was a carved chest for linens, another for letters, and sometimes a box locked with a key only she held. The hearth burned low. A cat slept nearby and walked, as if every step left footprints on history. Leisure and entertainment. The grace of stillness, the joy in quiet things. Not every hour was burdened with duty. Even a princess, bound in silk and expectation, was allowed to breathe. And in those soft, unscheduled moments, she found joy. Not loud, wild joy, but measured, meditative, a joy that whispered, a garden of her own. In spring, she walked the gardens, laid out in symmetry, with hedges clipped into labyrinths, flower beds shaped like hearts or crosses. There were sweet peas and hyacinths, lilies that nodded gently, and roses, red, ivory, pink, whose thorns reminded her of courtly love's bite. The garden was not only for pleasure, but for thinking, for remembering her mother's voice, for composing letters in her head. She sat beside the fountain, its soft babble drowning out the world. She dipped her fingers in cool water and watched the surface shiver, music and dance. Indoors, music was her companion. A harp rested near the hearth. A psaltery hung on the wall. She played, not for performance, but for presence. Each note was a breath. Each melody, a memory. Her ladies would sing in harmony, their voices rising like prayer, soft, slow, drawn from the chest rather than the throat. Sometimes there was dancing, nothing wild, just slow, processional steps in the hall, hands barely touching, eyes averted, but hearts quietly leaping. Books and words, the leisure of the mind. And sometimes, when the weather held her indoors and the corridors were quiet, she read a book of hours, a romance of chivalry, a hagiography of Saint Catherine, whose intellect had tamed emperors. If she could read Latin, she might study the writings of Boethius. If she had a private tutor, she might even attempt Cicero. And sometimes, she wrote a poem, a prayer, a secret confession folded into her book of hours. Words became a mirror, a place to see herself beyond her title. Christine de Pizan, the pen as pleasure. One extraordinary noblewoman turned that mirror outward. Christine de Pizan, born in 1364, was not only a poet, she was the first woman in medieval Europe known to make a living by her pen. Raised in the French royal court, Christine was educated far beyond expectation. After being widowed young, she did not remarry. Instead, she wrote. She composed ballads, political allegories, and defences of women at a time when men claimed women incapable of reason. Her most famous work, The Book of the City of Ladies, imagines a utopia governed by female wisdom, strength, and virtue. Falconry and hunting. On crisp mornings, when mist still curled along the ground, she donned her riding cloak and gloves. Falconry was not just a sport, it was an art. A conversation between woman and bird. The falcon sat on her gloved hand, alert, regal. It bowed to her before taking flight. She watched it soar, circle, then plummet with divine precision. When it returned, it brought more than prey, it brought pride. For in this moment, she was not only a symbol of peace, but mistress of a predator. Games and pastimes. On long winter evenings, she played chess. The bishop and knight moved with logic, but she moved with intuition. She always favoured the queen, not only because it was the most powerful piece, but because it began weak and became mighty. She also told stories, fairy tales, legends, family lore passed down in the language of flickering firelight. The younger ladies listened wide-eyed, leaning in as the princess whispered of dragons, of doomed lovers, of brave women in towers who rescued themselves. Moments between time. Not every entertainment had a name. Sometimes she simply sat at the window, watching snowflakes blur the edges of the courtyard, or in the chapel, listening to the echo of her own heartbeat against stone, or in her bed, staring at the canopy painted with stars, a private sky, beneath which she imagined other lives, other choices, other freedoms. She did not always smile, but she always felt. Leisure as reflection. Leisure was not idleness, it was preparation, time to observe, to nurture friendships, to listen and learn. It was in these moments of quiet that she began to understand the court, its alliances, its threats, its hidden players. And so, when she returned to duty, when she entered the hall, took her seat, spoke her lines, she did so not from instinct, but from knowing. Spiritual life, a quiet conversation with heaven. A princess did not own her life, but her soul was hers. And so, from the moment she could speak, she was taught how to pray, hands folded like wings, head bowed like a flower in rain. She lived within a world where the sacred was not separate from the everyday. It was sewn into her hem, painted on her walls, carved into the pews where she knelt each dawn. Faith was not merely practiced, it was woven in. Rituals and rhythm. Each day began with bells, matins before sunrise, prime just after, then terce, sext, and none. Vespers at twilight, compline by candlelight. Each toll was a tether, reminding her that even in silence, she was not alone. She carried a book of hours everywhere, a private manuscript, hand-painted. Her chapel, her heart within the castle, was a private chapel. Small, cold and dim, but to her, it was the warmest room in the world. Here she lit candles for the dead, left coins for the poor, knelt beside tapestries of Christ and the Virgin. She confessed to her chaplain, but there were sins too delicate to say aloud, so she confessed them to the walls, and hoped God was listening behind the stone. She fasted, wore a hair shirt in secret, did penance for thoughts she could not stop thinking, and when she emerged, no one would know, but she would. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, the princess who gave everything. Among the pantheon of noble saints, Elizabeth of Hungary shines like a quiet flame. Born in 1207 to the King of Hungary, married young to a German landgrave, Elizabeth might have lived in silk and silver, but her heart chose linen and ashes. She fed the poor daily, visited lepers, built hospitals from her dowry. Even after her husband's death, she refused remarriage. She entered a convent and served bread with her own hands to those who once served her. When she died at just 24, miracles were reported, and within 4 years, she was canonized. To this day, she is remembered not for her crown, but for the way she removed it. Patronage and piety. A princess's piety was not just personal, it was public. She funded abbeys, repaired cathedral roofs, commissioned relics from Jerusalem, and paid scribes to copy the Gospels by hand. Her spiritual gestures were political too, meant to display mercy, earn loyalty, and invite heaven's blessing on her household. But to her, it was never just performance. She truly believed in the sweetness of grace, the reality of angels, the power of intercession. And so, her prayers were not for show. They were hope, wrapped in reverence. Holy days and quiet nights. Holy days brought pageantry, processions with incense, mass under vaulting arches, choirs that sang so high, it felt like God had opened a window. But it was in the quiet nights that her faith deepened. She sat before the fire, book of hours open on her lap, reciting the Magnificat softly, not as a duty, but as a balm. She prayed not only for her soul, but for her father's safety, her brother's temper, her mother's smile, even for her enemies, especially for them. Because that, she was told, was the harder prayer. Sainthood and memory. She knew of women who had walked her path before. Hildegard of Bingen, the visionary abbess, Catherine of Siena, who counselled popes, Marjorie Kemp, who wept in holy ecstasy, and she wondered, would her name live as theirs did? Or would her life, her quiet, faithful life, fade like a hymn after its final note? She would not seek sainthood. She would not crave a kingdom within. The church called her body a vessel. Her father called her a chess piece. Her husband called her fair and dutiful. But in the chapel, in the still, echoing hush, she was only herself. Not a role, not a name, not a duty, just a soul, alone with the divine, loved by heaven. And that was enough. Limited freedom. She cannot choose where she lives, whom she marries, or even how she spends her afternoon. But within that gilded cage, she finds ways to flutter, with wit, with grace, with patience, and, sometimes, with quiet rebellion. Health and hygiene. The air is scented with lavender, but the corridors carry coughs. Physicians speak in humours. Midwives pray before births. Baths are rare. Rosewater, frequent. She learns to accept discomfort, to carry pain with a painted face. Isolation and loneliness. Even surrounded by attendants, she is often alone. Letters are her lifeline, memories, her companions. She misses the land of her birth, the laughter of a younger brother, the feel of a familiar prayer whispered in a familiar tongue. But she never shows it. Instead, she walks slowly through her garden and listens to the birds. And so she was, more than a name on a family tree, more than a gown in a portrait. She was the rhythm, beneath the rituals, the silence, behind the splendor, not merely royal, but real, not just a princess, but a person. And though her story was often written by others, tonight she rests, just as you do. And with that, dear listener, we gently close the final page of tonight's journey through a shimmering past. Whether you now dream of silken gowns or scented pomanders, may your sleep be sweet and your imagination soft as velvet. Thank you for joining us. Rest well. Take care of your beautiful self, whatever that means to you.